set?
Yep.
I'd like to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's May 21st, 2024. We're in the Aldermatic Chamber, and it's 7 p.m. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Senate,
Here.
Alderman Tebow,
Yeah, I am here. I am on Zoom. There's nobody in the room with me, and I'm here because I have double pink eye and I'm still contagious.
Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, ouch. Alderman Sullivan,
Here.
Alderman Kelly,
I'm here.
sorry, Alderwoman Kelly, Alderman Wilshire,
I'm here.
Alderman O'Brien, and Alderman Dowd.
Present. Okay, we have a quorum.
Alderman Clay.
And Alderman Clune. Oh, you were recording it.
Alderman Clee is here too.
And?
Oh, Alderman Lopez. Thank you.
Okay, before we get started, at the last meeting, there was some confusion. We did make an error. We cannot cancel the second public comment period for budget meetings, so that's been corrected as of the last meeting. So we will proceed with both public comment periods, and take public comment, yes. So we'll now take public comment. The item on the agenda is the budget for FY25.
Good evening. My name is Paula Johns. I'm a former member of the Board of Education up until November when things happened. I'm really concerned because the mayor said no more increase than 4%, which I think that's outrageous to begin with. The school district came in at 4.49%. The problem is that we have a declining population in our school district. And I'm sure you all read the redistricting report, and if you didn't, I would suggest you get a copy of it from last year. Our population, our student population is below 10,000, or I believe we're at 9,900 and something this year. We gained 57 more students, big deal. That's not gonna raise the numbers. And I'm sure we lost a great part of our state aid. I know Manchester last year lost 1.5 and they lost 7.8 million. I mean, beautiful what the computer does. You can do all your research. My biggest concern is our population is dwindling. Our costs in the school is rising. We've got a new school coming in, and we don't even have the amount of students that, although you would know, Alderman Dowd, what they had predicted, I believe 800 students to go across 3 schools for equity. And that didn't happen because we have, I believe, McCarthy Middle School has one of the lowest populations, I believe. I believe Pennachuck has more, if I remember correctly. And if I don't remember correctly, I have it in the book that I can pull it up. So given the fact that our population is dwindling, people are having kids, and all we're doing is building apartments. And in the redistricting study report, it talked about that we have more apartments than we do private homes. And we know, because I was at that meeting downtown that when we were talking about with Alderman Clee, people were complaining about apartments are being built and there's no green spaces, and no green spaces, no kids. And people aren't having kids the way they used to be. So when I've had the projections for 10 years back to now, from when we were 12,000, 11,000, 10,000, and it was around COVID that we lost a lot. And I want to let you all know that the Micro Society School has built a building, has bought a building right by where I live on West Hollis Street. And if they open that up to add more classes in there, I'm going to predict that our enrollment is going to come down even more. If parents have choices now for school other than public schools, we know parents are making those choices now. So I'm just saying, I'm really outraged by this budget. It is really high. And where the mayor gave a directive no more than 4% is at 4.9%. I think there still needs to be work done on the budget. Unfortunately, I wasn't there to ask the questions this year, but I think this is really an outrage with our student population declining so much. And I don't hear from anybody how we're going to bring these kids back into the district. I don't think we're going to. When we give the parents more and more opportunities out there, private school, charter schools, I think that's where the parents are sending their kids now, especially after COVID, for what happened here in the city and in the state. And I'm really upset because we
30
have a
seconds.
Taj Mahal that we're not gonna fill to capacity, and I'm blaming it on the Joint Special School Building Committee. They should have looked at the numbers, and they should have scaled it to where we are right now. Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? Seeing no one, we'll move on. Unfinished communications? None.
There is none.
Unfinished business?
There is none.
New business resolutions?
There is none.
New business ordinances?
There is none.
Tabled in committee?
Mr. Chairman, R24-057, relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2025 proposed budget for the City of Nashua, general enterprise, special revenue, and grant funds.
You make them- Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I motion to table
to
take off from the table, R24-057.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to remove from the table R24-057 so we can discuss tonight's education department. All those in favor, signify.
Roll call?
Roll call, you're right. Clerk calls the roll.
Oh, that's right, we have someone on Zoom. Alderman Senate,
Yes.
Alderman Tebow,
Yes.
Alderman Sullivan,
Yes.
Alderwoman Kelly,
Yes.
Alderman Wilshire,
Yes.
Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
You have 5 yeas.
Okay, so
You have 6 yeas, sorry. Can't count.
the budget is on the table. Tonight, we're going to be discussing Department 191, the school department. The revenues are on page 231 in the hard copy book, and 232 for appropriations. Is there anyone here that's going to present for the school department? You can both come up and seat if you want. Especially the guy with the book.
Is that just your budget?
Yes,
Compare?
lots of detail.
Do you want us to click through this? Because otherwise we're gonna give you the clicker.
If you want to give us the clicker, then.
Yeah,
Pardon me.
just aim it at.
You have to aim it at the front. Just so you know, when we get started, the thing that we've been discussing with the various departments is, we all know what everybody does, because it's in the book, and plus, as Alderman, we know what you do. So we've been asking them to look at, when it gets to Mr. Donovan's time, it'll be accounts that went up, accounts that went down, changes in staffing, and then there'll be general questions. Go ahead. Not yet.
Just a point of order. Haven't we traditionally had the chair of the budget committee for Board of Education here? I distinctly remember Ms. Johnson sitting where Superintendent Andre was last year.
Is your budget chair here?
She is not here. No,
President by proxy,
the,
maybe?
the,
or-
the president.
President can come up.
We aren't short on chairs, so.
As opposed to-
Plenty of room.
Okay, Dr. Andre. All set?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the committee having us here tonight. I'm Dr. Mario Andre, Superintendent of Schools, joined by Mr. Donovan, our CFO, and Ms. Bishop, the President of the Board of Education. Prior to getting into what lines went up and down, I think it's just, if we may just give a quick synopsis
Sure.
of just
Yep.
our district vision and some of our priorities kind of leading us into our budget presentation. So, that one.
Yeah, towards me, down towards the front. I can just click if you want.
You need to be tall.
I need to be taller.
Yep.
Oh, God, just-
Mayor.
There you
Oh,
go.
there we go.
You did it.
So just quickly, I think it's always important to remember the district's vision, where every student will have access to grade-appropriate assignments, strong instruction, deep engagement, and teachers with high expectations every day in every class. Furthermore, we want every student and family as an authentic partner and should have real opportunities to shape their experience, the experiences students have in school, receive accurate and accessible information about the student's progress, and have a legitimate role in decision-making. Maybe. Jen, if you're closer, do you want to see if that helps?
Yeah. Would I hit the next button, that one?
It should go, yeah.
Huh.
Hold on, let me just see.
If
Yeah.
you pointed at Alderman Clee, then she can press the button. Or just
Okay,
give
do
her-
it, Val.
why is it not moving? It's actually not moving.
Okay. I hate this.
Are you on the Zoom preview instead of the actual?
Yeah, we usually just do this. Oh, there it is. Is that the next one?
It is.
Okay, this time it worked. Oh, probably because they were doing it and I was trying to do it. And wait, no mouse.
Do you
So-
want to just do it? Alderman Clee?
Just tell me and I'll hit the
Yeah.
space bar.
Thank you.
Just point it at me and I'll do it.
So, this year in the budget, we're also looking at, I think we have the best tagline out there, is a gateway to opportunity. So we're trying to build 10,000 or approximately 10,000 gateways to opportunity for every single student. And in order to do that, we have to have some paradigm shifts. And so what we're looking at is our current system, and in this budget, our emergent system. And there's different factors, I think, that we're trying to address in our budget. And in this slide, we talk about what do we see above the surface? Some of the events, some of the conversations that are taking place. But below the surface, if you've been following the Board of Education for the last year, whether it's redistricting or changing some policies, we are trying to build a new system, one that is around Tier 1 instruction. So underneath the surface that you don't see in the budget, that's not what line went up or what line went down or what's this FTE, is that we're trying to really address patterns that have been happening over time. So how do we start changing and looking at our data? Structures that have been in place, what policies, laws, or dynamics that have been in place that we have to change. This past year, we changed a middle school leveling policy. That changed not just the number of teachers, but also the way that we're going to be doing business moving forward. And also mental models. As we know that every student is just not a data point. It's an individual, and one doesn't always equal one. So one student might require more or less resources than another student, or how do we educate students? So we have to change the mental models of how do we look at schools in the way that we do business. So really a lot of going on in this slide is what's our current system and what's our future system? And I think that's, again, a citywide kind of conversation and what we can be doing collaboratively on shaping the experiences for not only our students, but our families in Nashua. So we need to be building that together and thinking about what's our emerging system. Next. Next. So just here, there's a couple things that we need to focus on is what's our focus on learning? In each and every meeting that we have, we ask 4 questions. What do we want all students to know and be able to do? How do we know if they learned it? How will we measure it? What's our assessments? How will we respond if the students don't know the required information? And what do we do if the students already know it? How do we challenge students who are already proficient? What are, again, opportunities, gateways and opportunities for all students? And it looks different. But those 4 questions should be happening in every conversation, whether it's a budget meeting, it's a art curriculum meeting, it's a community meeting. But those are 4 essential questions that should be happening all the time and be reflected in our budget. Next. This is a different slide than that I have. If you go to the next, focus on collaboration is really an investment on our human capital. Besides our students, our adults, the people in our building is our strongest asset. So how do we invest in making sure our teachers, our paraeducators, our secretaries, any adult in our system is growing? And we know that we have some of the best experts within our own district. So how do we find time for them to collaborate? And we know that if our teachers are talking to each other, our administrators, that it will increase student outcomes. Next. And our focus on results. So how do we create system-wide standards of content and performance? And what's our relentless focus on continuous improvement? There's a couple great books out there, Simon Sinek, that talks about the infinite mindset. If schools hit our goals, we don't stop. If we were gonna be 100% proficient, we don't close schools. We never meet our goals. So we need to have that infinite mindset that we always have to have continuous improvement. How do we get better? And sometimes that's daunting, but that's about the mental model of we're never finished, we're never satisfied. There's always more to do in the schools, and we have to create that mindset of always improving and tweaking our systems. Next. So this year, before we get into the details, these are our budget priorities. If you look at our student achievement outcomes, we're below the state average. It's not where we need to be. So it goes back to those 4 essential questions. What do we want all students to know and be able to do? And one thing when we look at our data, it's really not a kid issue. It's a system issue. If only 20, 30, 40% of our schools are proficient, you can't make drastic improvements by intervening one at a time. We have to change our system. And that's our tier 1 instruction. What's a guaranteed viable curriculum that all students have access to. And so that's what we have to bolster up, our curriculum, our instruction, our assessment. In the elementary schools, we have a heavy focus on the science of reading. How do we improve the reading instruction for all of our students? And again, there's a lot of research behind that, and Scarborough's rope and the components of what makes a good reader. At the secondary level, we're looking at a portrait of a learner. What does a graduate look like when a student goes pre-K through 12 through the national school system? And a lot of the portrait of a learner skills are soft skills, collaboration, problem solving, communication, respectfulness, and we've been working hard on that system for the last couple of years. You'll also see in our budget focus on ELL services. As you know, we have DOJ, a Department of Justice settlement a few years ago that we're still working on that indicated that we are not providing enough instruction to our ELL students, and mostly is access and opportunity to tier 1 instruction, a guaranteed and viable curriculum. We're also looking in our budget on how do we bolster up our special education services, and lastly, real-world learning experiences. And that's whether through our CTE partnership, but really we're looking at our real-world learning experiences to expand the school walls into Nashua. We have a lot of untapped resources with our business partners, our community partners, that we want to make sure what students are learning in the classroom can be applied in the community, and what's being applied in the community can be transferred into the students' learning experiences. So those will be our budget priorities as you see going through the presentation tonight on where we're focusing, but it is really about improving systems. At this point, I'll leave some of the numbers over to Mr. Donovan. Next slide.
Next slide.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Dan Donovan, COO of the school district. This is just a quick view of the district. We have 18 schools, 12 elementary, 3 middle, 2 high, and then the alternative / preschool building on Franklin Street. Number of students, these are 10-1 dates. We always track them on a 10-1 date, as does the state. So as of 10/1/23, we had 9,772. Cost per student per the DOE report, which is a report that you do each fall for the previous school year, is $17,775. That's all costs, including grants. And then free and reduced, as of this fall of '23 was 42.5. That number's ranged from 41 to 43 during the last probably 7 or 8 years. ELL students, there's 1,729, that's 17.5%. And the special ed students, there's a little over 2,000, and that's 20%. You could be both ELL and special education, so it's not necessarily separate. Next, please. Okay, here's our pie chart. And basically, what we do here is we compare the budget in this current year, the fiscal year '24 budget, to what we're proposing for next year, the '25 budget. As you can see by the blue and the red, about 84% of our costs are labor and benefits, or a school system, kind of makes sense. So that number of 83 to 85% has been pretty steady over the last 10 years or so. The other items on the category that I list are what I would call significant items. Utilities, transportation, which is mostly the first student, but it's also special ed. The out-of-district tuition for our special ed students that need services that we can't provide internally. And then you can see the OT-PT special education number. I'll speak more about that. There's a significant increase in that this year, and like I said, I'll speak to that a little more as we move on. And then all the other expenses. And that's sort of a visual view of the costs it take to run a school district. Next, please. Okay, school funding sources. So just so everyone gets a good sense of, the full cost, what this committee and what gets approved is the operating budget. You do approve other funds, but the operating budget seems to get most of the attention. So this was this school year, the '23-24, the operating budget approved by the BOE, so that's without benefits and FICA and pension, that was $125 million. Benefits, FICA, and pension added by the city calculations, that's another $48 million. The grants, Title I, II, III, the IDEA grant, most of those are the federal grants that we receive typically every year. That's about $12.3 million this year. The ESSER funds, which were the COVID funds, which are going away in September of this calendar year. Going into the fiscal year '24, we had about $14.5 million left. Bonded debt, the cost of the work we've done on our buildings. Last year, it was $9.3 million. That's principal and interest. The special revenue funds, most of which, probably about 90% of that, is the food service. Food service is a special revenue fund. The revenue it generates pays for all its costs. And then the revenue to offset costs, that's the revenue we get from the state of New Hampshire. Most of it is the adequacy aid, and that number was projected to be $58 million. It's probably going to be a little bit higher when we get to the end of the year. Next. Okay, so this is where the percent comes in. So as I mentioned on the slide before, the base budget without benefits and FICA and pension was $125 million. We're proposing that to be, for next school year, $131 million. That's an increase of 5.6 and 4.49%. Next, please. So typically I break it out into two pieces. There's the 85% or so that I mentioned before. There's the labor piece, and then there's the all the other costs, the non-labor piece. So the labor piece itself is, even though it's still the biggest piece of our budget, the increase this year for a couple different reasons is lower. It's only 1.95%. in the labor costs for this year, and as we'll get into more detail on that in an upcoming slide also. Next, please. And this is the non-labor budget increase, and this is showing 13.6% increase. And like I said, I'll explain why that is. We're moving some accounts from labor to non-labor because of contracted services, et cetera. But we'll get into those details. But those two combined equals the 4.49% increase that we're requesting. Next. Okay, so talking about some of the significant line increases. The first item is staffing services. Now, a couple of years ago, we hired a company called ESS to do our substitute staffing, to find substitutes for us. It was very difficult, especially during and after COVID, to find anyone to come in for substitutes. So we decided it was overwhelming our HR department, so we decided to try this firm. So we signed a 2.5-year contract with them. So staffing services used to be budgeted internally because they were our employees. They were substitutes that worked for us. Now they're working for a contracted service. So that's one of those big differences that I mentioned earlier. It used to be part of labor, and now it's part of contracted services. So that's just a change. It's not, we always had this cost. We're putting it at a different place. So if you look at the budget, it goes from 0 to 950, but it's really, that cost was in the budget already, but it was under a labor line. Pupil support services, that is our OT and PT costs. Most of that goes towards the special ed students, and that's going to be an increase of approximately $100,000. We use 2 services, outside services, to perform that work for us. And the costs, the number of units or time spent with the students is increasing, and the cost of those times is also going up. So it's about a $100,000 increase. The next one, contracted services. Now, this is by far the largest increase. The 1.5 million of that is a contracted service that we put aside. It's the first time we've ever budgeted that in the school district. We have been unable to find the staff required for special education students, teachers, specialists, RBTs, et cetera. The whole crew of people that work to provide these services are in high demand. They're very difficult to find. Over the last couple of years, we have been using ESSER funds to pay for these costs. Since we haven't been able to fill the position, we've then had to go out and hire a contracted service to do that work. The contracted service is typically 3 to 3.5 times what it would cost us if we could hire that person. So it's a significant increase. We've been using ESSER funds to pay that. For this school year, we're going to pay $3.5 million to contracted services to cover the costs where we can't find internal staff. So we figured we're an all-out push to get more staff in. We've seen a little bit of improvement so far per the HR director. Hopefully that will continue. But as a safety net, I budgeted $1.5 million here. So like I said, it was 3.5, I'm only budgeting 1.5. It's the kind of cost that if we fill all the positions, we won't need all this money. But if we don't, and I don't think we're gonna fill them all, just not gonna, that's not gonna happen. That would be a dream. So that's what that big increase in that account is. Next is water, just because of the costs of water and what we've been running, it's $50,000. Heating gas is up. We're in a contract with the city now. The cost per therm went from 5 cents to 8 cents. That contract goes through December of '24. After that, hopefully we'll be able to get a lower rate, but that's sort of based on if the contract stays at that level. Telephone is one that annoys me all the time. You would think it would go down, it never seems to go down. That does include internet costs, so it's just not telephone, as you and I might use the term. We are putting in a new phone system during the summer, so I'm hoping the cost will reduce, but I was told that by the previous IT director when we put in the new system in 2016, the cost would go down. It never went down. So, you know, when it happens, I'll believe it. Okay. Transportation services, both special ed and regular transportation services. The contract is a 3% increase. That's slightly less because I budgeted a little bit less on the, for the monitors for the special ed students. I figured why budget the whole amount? We can never find the whole amount, so let's not budget the whole amount. So that's why percentage-wise it's a little less than the contract says of 3. Educational supplies, those are just different budget lines within the school budget, so that specific line is high, but it's really not. In total, the schools got about the same amount of money they got last year. And then the next 3, the testing materials subscriptions, next 2, those are curriculum-based items. Right now, we used to spend a lot of money on textbooks and things. We spend a lot less money on textbooks. We spend more money on subscriptions because of these online things. So the subscription lines tend to be going up and the book lines tend to be going down. Though we did in this budget increase our curriculum in total by probably about $300,000 or $400,000. As superintendent mentioned earlier, having the right curriculum, having the right teachers teach the right curriculum, that's how you get to where you want to go. And then the other one that's increased is computer software. Due to the ransomware attack that we had about a year ago, we've put more things on the cloud. We've added some more security software, things like that. That costs money. Not that I'm an IT expert, but I think we're in a better place than we were last year. If it goes wrong, don't talk to me. All right, next. Okay, so some of the non-labor type increases, that's that $1.5 million that I talked about for special ed services. It would be nice if we didn't have to have it, but like I said, 1.5 to 3.5, we'll see. The other difference that's up there is existing teacher substitutes. We had such a hard time with substitutes for the last few years. At the high school, what we did, and once again, ESSER paid for this, so now it's something we want to try to keep for another year, see how if it continues to work well. At the high school, they have block scheduling, so there's 4 periods, main periods a day for the students. Teachers teach 3 of those 4. The other one, they have a planning period. We offered them the choice that if they wanted to, we would pay them for that planning period, and then they would cover a class. So you have an existing teacher who's at the school, who the students know, who can teach the class, possibly, but at the very least, it's a known entity in the building, and it's not someone like me just walking in and trying to take care of a bunch of high school kids. The high schools liked it. It worked well. So that's my estimate of the cost based on how we're running this year.
Sorry, I jumped ahead.
That's fine.
That's the end of the book.
Okay. All right. Additional staffing that we added this year. With the new middle school, McCarthy Middle School, they have fields, which is great. So all the Elm Street kids don't have to get bused somewhere for practice and games. They're going to be able to have home fields. But with that, we needed another groundskeeper. So that's what that is. ELL teachers. We added 7 ELL teachers, as superintendent said. That's one of our priorities. We're working with the DOJ for a few years. We need more teachers in front of these students. So that's 7 teachers. Family engagement coordinators, we added 3 new ones. These were new positions. This is also part of the DOJ. These are people that that work with the ELL families so that those families understand and can work with the school administration. If you talk to almost any principal, they'll say these people have made their life so much easier. So as an entity, the district had said, we want to have more of these people. They used to work part-time and things. We hired some of them full-time through ESSER, but now most of the schools will have a full-time person doing that. So that's sort of a new position over the last few years. So in total, that's 671,000 of new positions. Next. Okay, as you're well aware, we had a lot of ESSER money over the last 3 to 4 years. These are the positions that we moved from ESSER into our operating budget. 7 more ELL teachers. That's not the same. So in total, we're going to have 14 new ELL teachers. 7 of them happen to be in ESSER. 7 are going to be new ones hired this year. So that's the first item. The next couple items are IT positions that we added. During this period since COVID, we've gone to a 1-to-1 computer or Chromebook per student at the middle school and at the high school. So with that, we have a lot more devices. As you can imagine, given a 6th to 7th grader a Chromebook to carry back and forth, it gets banged up a bit. So there's just more work there because we have a lot more devices. So those positions are in ESSER. We said we really kind of need to move them over. The database administrator does less work with Chromebooks per se, but that's someone that's helping with we have a lot of different softwares now, and that person's helping with that. And then the next position, it's a digital coordinator. That is sort of an IT/curriculum kind of person. If you have more questions, you can ask the superintendent what they actually do. Family engagement coordinators, I mentioned them earlier. There were 3 of them hired new. These were 4 that were in in ESSER, and we're moving them to the operating budget. There's a curriculum coach at the secondary level. We have multiple coaches at the elementary level. This was a position that was in ESSER, and we decided that it's important to keep. And a second attendance officer. We've always had, when I first started here, we had 2, and then we went down to 1. We've had 1 for probably 8 to 10 years. This was a person, excuse me, that we had in the ESSER funds, and the high schools felt strongly they'd like to keep the position. So that's the total amount of salaries moved from ESSER, so it's a little over $1 million moved from ESSER into the operating budget. Okay, so since we were adding positions, we also made some decisions to reduce positions. With the reduction in the number of students, especially at specific schools, we reduced 7 elementary positions. That's an estimate of 350,000. You know, now that we know the specific people, you could put a real number on it, but when we did the budget, we didn't know who the specific people were going to be. Class sizes are still going to be just fine, especially in elementary schools. And then the middle school positions, with the new school, with the change in, well, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we have a change in the configuration of how many teachers will be on a team. Really going from a 5-person team where there was, in some cases, 2 ELA blocks down to 4-person teams. So essentially, it's eliminating 12 elementary positions. But we're confident that the students will have still access and opportunity to get to the curriculum at the Tier 1 system. So the reconfiguration of the amount of teachers on the team, and also with the declining enrollment, we don't need as many teams. So that's where the 12 teachers kind of came from.
And then the last item there is, there were 14 positions within ESSER 3 that we did not bring over. So I'd been preaching this for years since we got the ESSER funds. They were temporary. They would help us get through COVID. They were sort of specific, you could use them for these various things. Then they opened that up and allowed you to use it for many different things. So the previous slide had shown that we moved some over to the operating budget, and these are the 14 positions that we did not, so those positions are being eliminated from the district. Next. Okay, this is a slide that our Board of Education had asked, okay, when you do the reductions in elementary, what do you expect to see? I know it's hard to read. Don't spend much time looking at the individual school lines, because you're gonna see some really high numbers and some really low numbers. The number to really key in on is the bottom right, where it's 18.4. So the average number of students per class is about 18. When we made the eliminations, then it's up to the principal to decide, okay, I'm gonna have 3 first grades and 1 second grade, or 3 and 2, or whatever. So those numbers aren't going to be real when you look at the actual class size. My eyes are pretty good, so I can see, for example, Birch Hill, you have 10 students in the first grade. They're not gonna have 10 students in the first grade, because further on, they have like 22 in the 5th grade. So they'll move a teacher. They'll move the teachers, but we're gonna leave that decision is the principal, and if they have any questions, they'll work with central office administration. But like I said, the key there's gonna be about 18 students per class.
Just on that, we're really cognizant of anytime you're saying you're eliminating teachers, what are the ramifications? So we were, again, really cognizant, making sure that our classes weren't too high. So you'll see 18 being the average, but I don't think there's any classes that are gonna be over 24, 25. In some cases, if there's only like 28, 30 kids in a grade level, that's 2 classes, so the class size is gonna be 14, 15. There's just no other way to split that, and having 30 elementary kids in one class is just too high. So again, even through the elimination of some teachers, we are still really cognizant on making sure our class size was still small. And at the next slide, you'll see the same projection for the middle school. Again, where the reconfiguration, going from 2 teams or 5-person teams down to 4-person teams, or just moving, you could see from, say, Fairgrounds, grade 8, they had 3 teams last year, they're going down to 2 teams because there's a decrease in student population. We're still looking at that number of where there might be 25 students in a class. We're, again, really cognizant on that. At the middle school level, not that we think it's ideal, but by contract, it's up to 31 students in a class. I think, again, that's too high, but we want to be really cognizant on class size. And as Mr. Donovan said, if you look at the far right total, you can see the total amount of students, the amount of teachers, and what the average class sizes are going to be. So even with the reconfiguration, we're really cognizant on making sure that class sizes aren't that big, and we're not putting too much stress on our teachers. And again, going back to one of my first slides of what's our current system to what's our emergent system. And this is, I think, the first year in a long time that we've actually reduced this amount of teachers, not only due to ESSER, but also the declining enrollment. So, but again, I just really want to emphasize, we did pay attention to what class sizes are. We didn't want to eliminate more teachers and have class sizes in the elementary at 28, 30 students. I think that's just way too high.
And I think one other point about that on the middle school on that slide was we made the assumption that all the 5th graders are going to go to the 6th grade. We have seen over the last 7 or 8 years that we tend to lose students in the 6th grade because they're going to ASD, and then a bunch of them come back in the 9th grade. But this has been fairly consistent. So I would assume those numbers would be lower for the 6th grade if that pattern continues, and I don't see why it would suddenly change in 1 year. Okay, next. And this is just showing the sort of number of students on the far right, where we were in 18, where we are now, and then the initial budget requests made by the superintendent's office, and then what was approved by this body. So that's just a little statistical data to send you on your way.
May I ask, when you say approved by the POA, is that for last year's?
Yes,
Okay, for 2024, right?
for this current year that we're in now, it was a 3.01%.
Okay, so, but okay, sorry, never mind. I see it.
Okay, is that the, okay, so now we'll have questions from the Budget Committee members. Let's make sure that we keep to the budget numbers. And I see that Alderman Tebow has his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry I can't be there tonight. That would be, I would prefer that. So I got a couple questions, a couple comments. You know, seeing that last slide and seeing that students continue to go down, but the budget continues to go up is interesting. When I asked a few months ago that I had heard that we were going to be laying off teachers, I was told by one of the people here, either Mr. Donovan or Dr. Andrade, that it was just ESSER-related positions. But now we see that that's not true. There's 19 non-ESSER. So a couple of the questions I have here is, so when Dr. Andrade first spoke, he said it wasn't due to student decrease on some of these items. But then at the end, he said, we are seeing student decrease. And so I guess I'm a little confused about that. Are we trying to do stuff to bring students back to our schools? Why, you know, some of the, I love this gateway to opportunity. Sounds great. Pie in the sky, you know, best logo we've ever had, or best motto we've ever had. Great, wonderful. But in it, it's a changing, emerging, it's changing. And we've already got rid of leveling at the middle school level, which I didn't want. If we almost got these pods that luckily we survived for now, which I think is a private school thing. So how do we get these kids back so we can focus on those kids and not lose them to private schools? Are we concerned about that, or are we just okay with students leaving the system, but yet we'll have the budget continue to go up? And I guess that question is for Dr. Andrade, and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, be more than happy, and I think, you know, our budget priority is around that Tier 1 instruction. And again, it's moving the systems to have higher expectation. As Mr. Donovan said, we're heavily invested in better curriculum resources, where there's almost $300,000 in curriculum resources. Again, that goes back to the 4 questions of what do we want all students to know and be able to do, and what are we going to do to challenge our students. And I think over the years, and no fault of any of our educators, is that we didn't have a system in place with the right resources, and kids were not challenged. And so therefore they went to other schools. So again, going back to that priority of our Tier 1 instruction is to make sure every student has access to a rigorous curriculum that's at grade level standards, and we have PD for our teachers to meet those challenges. So again, it's those 4 questions, and it's the investment in rigorous Tier 1 curriculum. I know you mentioned the leveling. There was a number of students who we were actually not raising the bar to. And I think that's the idea of de-leveling, is actually raising expectations for all students and feeling so that they're challenged to meet those expectations and empower them to have their voice to meet grade level expectations. And that's how we're going to retain students. There's going to be a challenging, rigorous curriculum that will hopefully retain those students. So that's where you see it in the budget. Again, we're asking about the elimination of those teachers at the elementary level was, if I misspoke a month ago, is the reduction of, or the reduction in our enrollment. We had very small class sizes at the elementary level, and again, by eliminating 7 elementary positions, our class sizes are still at 18.2. It was actually lower this year. But our way to retain families in the system is through our Tier 1 instruction. And again, that's our budget priority, is to invest in Tier 1 and improve the system for all students.
So,
Thank you. One
just
follow-up,
going
Mr. Chairman.
forward, if I don't recognize you, say your name,
I'm sorry.
because the transcriptionist can't see you. She has sometimes a hard time figuring out who's speaking. You follow up, Alderman Tebow?
Thank you. So I will tell you, I'm glad my kids are almost done this school. Because I expect more from the school system, and maybe you'll get there, and that's why we're going through this now. But I would have a hard time supporting this if this was just a budget by itself. To see it went up when the mayor wanted it 4%, which was still high when you look at the years past, and I would still say I wouldn't support it. And maybe I don't support the budget because of this part of it. The last question, and I'll let you answer it, and then I'll be quiet for now. What does the teachers union think about your budget priorities and the stuff that's in this budget? Are they aligned with it, or are they against it, or are they for it? Because I hear a lot of pie in the sky, but there's got to be some challenges here too.
Dr. Andre?
Dr. Andrade, I haven't had a direct conversation with them to see if they were in full support or not, so I can't answer on that behalf.
All set? Alderman Tebow?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. I had to chuckle. We were talking about 7th graders bringing back their Chromebooks because that'll be my daughter in a couple weeks. And yeah, it'll need some help. I had some staffing questions. So I remember a number of years ago, and excuse me if I get the title wrong, but we were talking a lot about mental health in our schools and bringing in some support. I don't see those in your FTEs anymore. Were those not filled? Are they going away? Did I just miss it?
Dr. Andrew?
Dr. Andrews, so specifically, a couple years ago, I'm not quite sure what positions you're mentioning. So each elementary school has school counselors. There was an increase of school social workers over the number of years. So I don't know if there's no new positions in the area of social emotional supports in this budget. So I don't know if I'm missing the question.
Well, I think maybe
Follow
perhaps,
up?
thank you. I think perhaps we need some more detail in our FTEs, but I know President Bishop knows what I'm talking about, might be able to.
I think she might be referring to the contracted therapy services that we have in the school, not necessarily our staff that we're paying for, but the people that come in, like the youth council and several other.
If you want to.
Sure. Yes.
Is that what, can I just clarify, is that what you mean, Alderwoman Kelly?
My brain's a little rusty, a lot of
Okay,
comments
I think that's
today.
what, I think that's what you
But I
mean.
remember there was a whole conversation around mental health and needing
Yeah.
these services for people. And
Yeah.
we put aside specific money for you guys to be able to fund those positions.
Mhm.
That was
Again,
something we
before
hadn't
you
done before.
start speaking, identify who you are for the transcriptionist.
Sorry, Jen Bishop.
Dan Donovan, to speak to, let's say, youth council specifically, there was money in the budget. There was also money in ESSER for about 6 different positions. The youth council is closing its doors in the end of June. But what we've worked with them, and to fund most of those positions, they got grants from the state. So they have passed on that information to us. We have applied for those grants, so we're hoping to keep all those positions covered by a grant. So it's not in the operating budget, but it's in the grant. And hopefully, I don't think we've received a response from the state, but the youth council led us to believe that we'd be in pretty good shape to keep those positions.
If I could follow-up?
Follow-up?
Thank you, that's good news to hear. I have a couple other questions. So, you were talking about the ESSER positions, and you were talking about the ones we're keeping. My historical question here is, were these positions that we had in our budget that we funded, and then ESSER came in, we were able to offload that cost for a bit and then came back, or are they all new that we never had before we had ESSER funds?
Dan Donovan, those are all new.
Great. And then I guess just follow on to my first question is, so you're talking about social workers and other types of counselors. They're not in our FTE. Do they go under a certain, like if you go to the back of our book, the only counselor that's called out is a career counselor. And then I see a psych intern, but I don't see any of those other
Yeah,
positions.
sorry, Dan Donovan, they're listed under the teacher group. I can
they
give
go
you a
under-
breakout of that if you'd
I'd
like.
love to see that, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That's why I was getting confused. That's it for now.
All set? Oh, yes. Alderman Senate?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have a couple of questions, so I'll try to organize my thoughts the best I can here. Calling out the increase that you had touched upon on the staffing services, the contract you had signed to seek out substitutes. When was that contract initiated? Did that begin this year?
Dan Donovan, no, this is the end of the second year.
Okay, so do you have a metric on how that has played out? Has that been more fruitful in obtaining substitutes for the schools, less fruitful, about the same?
Dan Donovan, good question. It's about the same prior to COVID. So we were maybe 50% at best when we were doing it on our own for all those years. When COVID hit, we went way down, obviously. We didn't have school for about a year. And then it slowly crept up, but the numbers were very, very low. A lot of our substitutes are older people that come back and help out in the schools. They had no intention of going back in for a couple years. So I'd say right now, the numbers are probably where they were, a little bit lower than where they were prior to COVID.
Okay, follow-up?
Follow-up?
And is the cost associated with that, is that greater than, consistent with, or less than what our costs for substitute teachers were prior to going in this direction?
Dan Donovan, that would be, it's certainly more because we're paying them to provide that service. I would say it's about 15%, 15 to 18% more.
I have a couple others if I could.
Follow-up?
All right. The next item I want to ask about is just a few below there. Program improvement services. I noticed that there's an 80% drop in the in 24 to 25. Could you speak a little to what those program improvement services would entail? 53607, if it helps.
Five, 53607, that's only about 25,000, right?
It was 25,000 in 24. It's down to 5,000 this year.
Okay, that is one item budgeted in the curriculum budget, and they changed the curriculum budget to a lower number this year. So, one thing about the way we budget certain line items like educational supplies, like that line, a couple others, most of the dollars for those budgets come from the schools. So what we do is we give each school an allocation based on the number of students they have. So for example, 200,000 is a round number that we give to each one of the high schools. An elementary school the size of Bicentennial might get about 45,000, and a smaller one might get, let's say, 32,000 or something. So we allow them to budget those funds any way they want. So if they put it all in supplies and then move it around during the year, that's okay. And this program improvement service, that was in the curriculum budget put together by the curriculum staff. And they just changed one of the line items. They're not gonna spend it on that, they're gonna spend it on something else.
Okay. One more, if I could. As the Ward 7 Alderman, I guess it's incumbent upon me to ask what I guess I'll call the June Karen question, which is disregarding capital projects that are being discussed at the ad hoc committee. Is there anything major outstanding here that, bird's eye view, is not in this budget that you would have liked to have asked for?
Dan Donovan personally, I'll let the superintendent answer that also, but the deferred maintenance. And the deferred maintenance, the way that it's done is kind of clunky. There's a report put together, shared with the CIC committee in January of every year. They put together a report. Mr. Smith has been requesting close to $1 million, between 600,000 and $1 million. And there's a whole process we go through. We talk about all these items, and then when the budget comes, the mayor just plugs a number in. And it's 100 or it's 200 or whatever. But to me, there's never a lot of time spent on, Alderman Dowd knows all about this. He's worked to try to get that number up. But if we want to spend less, just like your own home, right? You want to spend less on the significant renovation, do some of the maintenance. So I think it was up, but we don't really put that line item in our budget. So what I would say going forward, it'd be great if we could
Just,
make it part of the school's budget.
if I could just interject, the ad hoc committee is looking at a whole new way of funding that deferred maintenance, and I think it will be significantly different than it is now, but we're not there yet.
Yep.
Or they're not there yet, because I'm not on the committee, but it may be taken care of. So we'll stand by. Is that you?
For the moment, yeah.
Can I just finish the other two?
Yeah.
Just
go
from Dr. Andrade, just the other two areas that we look for that we didn't ask for in this budget, or we did ask for, but probably still not enough, is still in our special education services. You know, as Mr. Donovan said, we had to use a lot of contract services this year. We have more students with IEPs requiring more intense services this year, and so by federal regulations, we have to provide those services. You know, we're putting aside $1.5 million right now, or thereabouts, but that number can increase, and it's a gamble. And so that we always can increase our special education budget line. And then the other one is our ELL. Even though we have an increase of 14 teachers this year, according to the DOJ settlement, it's still not enough. We're barely getting by and meeting the minimum requirements for our ELL teachers. Next year, already working with the ELL department, we'll require probably another 5 to 7 teachers. We couldn't get, as it was mentioned earlier, we're already asking 4.49. I couldn't come in here asking like over 5% or close to 7% to get all those positions. And the priorities would have been skewed. So we are working with the Department of Justice on what's a 3-year plan to get at numbers. Just for a clear example, per the DOJ requirement, every content teacher needs 5 hours of coaching by an ELL certified teacher. We have 0 coaches in the ELL department. So I think one of the ELL positions will be next year for 1 coach. We could use 3 or 4 coaches just to meet that requirement. So that would be something that's not in the budget, but expect it next year.
you.
Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. I've got a lot of questions, but I've separated them into buckets, and they're around revenue, surplus, and headcount. So for the first go at it, I want to go to revenue if I could. In fiscal year '24, if I'm reading my spreadsheet correctly, and I think Mr. Donovan, you might have alluded to it, but we were budgeted to get 36 million in state adequacy aid from the state. And then in the column over, it says we got close to 55 million. And I think you had alluded to the fact that we got more than we expected. Can you talk through that? And you're projecting 58 million for this fiscal year. How confident are you in that figure?
Dan Donovan, I'm as confident as the report that I got from the state that said it's going to be 58 million. So the adequacy aid has been, there was a court case that we were involved with, that I testified with, Attorney Bolton was at, about the cost of an adequate education. What happened, it had historically been about $3,500 to $3,600 per student. It's a longer calculation than that, but the base adequacy is $3,600. For every student you have, the state gives you $3,600. Last year, at the end of the year, while this case was going on, I'm not a politician, so I don't know what happened, but the state suddenly decided to move that number up to $4,200. So when they did that, that's what the big increase that we received last year that we didn't project because they hadn't mentioned it.
I see.
They also put in another funding source, I'll call it, as part of the equation that they added. We received another 3 or 4 million from that. That's a temporary thing. That's not part of what's going on. But for future reference, the case was initially won. The state is appealing it. But the judge ruled that number per student should be about $7,200. So if the $7,200 comes through after the appeal, then you're going to see this 58 million go up a lot higher.
Okay.
But that's kind of what's going on. There's a lot of movement where typically there isn't.
Sure.
Follow up.
Thanks. Just one follow-up on the revenue piece. I see there are 2 line items here. One called out for state aid for charter schools and then the education freedom account. I know that there's been a lot of noise out there about those. Am I correct in reading this that Nashua students get about $80,000 from the state to attend a charter school and then $50,000 for the city for education freedom accounts?
We receive, for the freedom accounts, we receive $50,000, and that's sort of since the students are leaving us, they sort of give us back some money. So that's what that is.
Okay.
That's not a big number for us. And the state aid for charter schools, that is for the students that we send to charter schools, and we have to provide like certain sped services for them.
Yep.
So they can go to one of the charter schools, public charter schools, but we still have to provide the special education services.
I see. Okay, good to know. I'll take a breath for now. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good for now.
And by the way, we also have to provide busing to those other schools, so that's a cost.
Yes, if the school is in Nashua.
In Nashua, yes.
So if you have a building in Merrimack, have them move it there, we'll save a lot of money.
Alderman Lopez.
I have a question for all 3, but different questions, not the same one. Starting with Superintendent Andrade, you were talking a lot about how the school district is trying to do a fundamental, reconceptualization of education. I think you mentioned looking at a different mental model. And you did say that if the mental model is fully engaged and we're doing a really good job, then we don't close schools. So if we could just take that one sentence and have the Manchester Link or whoever quote him on that. You're talking about community-based learning, and more seriousness. Is that correct?
real-world application, so we want to make sure that students are applying, so they, whether it's through internships, real-world experiences, they might be working with, Enterprise Bank on, business plans and projections and aspects. So we really want to see our students in the community applying some of their skills or conversely.
And I think you're probably mostly talking about high school students who are getting direct community interaction with, maybe what used to be called service learning, but a little bit more like direct interaction kind of stuff. But also in terms of the learning, maybe more diverse opportunities for kids to show learning knowledge. I know in some cases, for example, if a student gets behind, in the days of yore, when most of us were in school, you have to do extra credit or, get all your assignments in at the last minute, but maybe now there's more virtual learning or alternative ways to kind of test out.
That's exactly it, and both high schools have been competency-based for a number of years, and we just want to make sure that it's a little more thorough and rigorous. A lot of times we say we're competency-based, but we're not making up the specific competency that we're missing. And again, both high schools have a system and structure in place for that credit recovery, or they're doing online tutorials. There's a lot of opportunities for our high school students not to fall behind. But again, we don't want students to ever fall behind. So how are we proactive in engaging students so that we can find what their passions are, that they have voice and choice around that tier 1 instruction. So again, if we use online learning or the computer system, and we look at the standards, it says the students will demonstrate X, Y, and Z. It doesn't say that they have to write a 5-page paper.
It has competencies rather than specific assignments.
Around that competency, are they creating videos? Are they, there's different ways to actually meet that grade level standard. So that's what I mean by rethinking and re-engaging our students. And sometimes, again, at the secondary level, we want to see that natural connection where kids say, when am I ever going to use this? That they actually have that, we have that answer for them so that they can see how the skills that they're learning in the classroom are applicable. And if we go backwards, we're having conversations with some business partners in higher ed. What does a middle school experience look like? So how do you open the eyes of a 6th grader to say, here's a future pathway for me, instead of waiting for high school? And even working at the elementary, do the elementary students know the resources and opportunities within their community? So again, it might not be a real world internship, but 3rd and 4th graders knowing what an engineer does or how their math that they're learning is being applied in an engineering firm. So those are the real world opportunities that we want to expose our students to.
Little leeway, but try to direct your questions to something that's directly involved with the budget.
That was where I was going. So as a budgetary item, you have identified for ELL students, family-based coordinators or community-based coordinators. Is there anybody performing that role, or is like for students who may be doing more off-site learning? One of the values of like having everybody come in at 8 a.m. in the morning, sit down at their desk and hand in the papers in the more traditional format was you could keep your eyes on everybody, but if they're all doing different multifaceted learning experiences, is that increasing the demands of either outreach on the part of teachers or outreach on the part of guidance or some other entity in the school?
Yeah, so again, as a budget kind of item, it's essentially revenue neutral, but it's the rethinking of how the school councils are engaging with families and students. The teachers are around the table when we're creating different assessments, so it's coming from them. It's that focus on collaboration. So it might not be any new positions, but rethinking the way that we're currently utilizing our current positions. But that's the collaboration of making sure that the school councils are around the table, or our teachers are writing a new curriculum or assessment so that they can monitor the students demonstrating their skills in a different way. So again, that's kind of revenue neutral, but it's working together.
Maybe now, I guess, to an integrated care model. So for President Bishop, having watched the Board of Education meetings particularly, I will disagree with the with the public comments sentiments expressed. that the school didn't do a good enough job in cutting back. I watched the initial kickoff meetings, even if I couldn't myself attend, and the sentiment that I heard was, number one, what was initially being asked was 4%, and so the school board and the school district had to commit to doing what they actually felt could be managed, but an actual number looked more like 7%, and I think Superintendent Andre referenced that earlier when he said if we had money, we'd probably put more money in for coaches so that ELLs would have the supervision or training that they need, per the DOJ's area. And I can only surmise there were probably other things that were cut. With the school district's position clear, what is the Board of Education's? Do you think if we approve this budget, we're going to be funding a workable school model that meets all of the points, or is there a greater need for advocacy for specific areas that maybe the board could be educated specifically on? As part of our process, we go through the review tonight, and then we have a workshop wrap-up session, and then it goes before the full board. So just because you're presenting the budget now doesn't mean that there isn't specific circumstances where amendments could be made.
Ms. Bishop?
I actually believe Mr. Donovan said it was closer to 8.5% was to keep our budget as is, but I think the Board of Ed voted on the budget that was brought here because we believe in the ideas that Dr. Andrade is presenting in regards to the views of the district and how it's growing. I would like to see some of those ESSER positions come back in. I think the social emotional learning piece is pretty important. I think even kids with or without the COVID experience, more supports within the school to help them grow into mature young adults is always a welcome opportunity. But I recognize that we're working within a budget that has constraints and we have a city that has significant needs elsewhere. And if we can figure out a way to make this budget work for the students that we have within the resources that we already have, let's not be too taxing on what we're asking the city. Let's be resourceful and maybe reallocate the positions that we have into positions that are more beneficial to students. So I'd like to see this model go through because I think it's more in line with kind of the future planning of what we want, but it's also respectful to the city and what the city has to give.
So, as I understood the
Follow-up?
presentation, yes, thank you, sorry. As I understood the presentation, there is an effort and an awareness that maybe we'd like more ELL teachers than we have, but we can't staff at the levels that they're required.
Right.
So we budget for them, hoping we'll get them. And because if we also have a line item, I'm drawing a blank,
Special education.
in the middle.
Mr. Donovan?
Mr. Donovan, sorry. Mr. Donovan pointed out that the contracting plan basically was 3 times the amount that we would be paying for in-district staff. So that compensates for it. Every person you pick up in the school district definitely expands the available money. So in theory, you could have, if everything went perfectly, and it never would, 3 times as many ELL or special education if you didn't need those contractors. So I guess it would be, I know some of those contracts are coming up over the next year. I'm sure the Board of Education will have some lively discussions, but maybe narrowing that gap to, okay, well, this is what we currently pay. This is what we could pay if we could keep them in district, might be in order. My question for Mr. Donovan, the last table that you had up here suggested, well, it just listed the last couple of years of proposed budgets and then, and then Board of Aldermen approved budgets. There's no anything in between, like what did the mayor accept and then what came before us. And the process that we have is this, where we hear from the school district what's wanted after there's already been discussion with the Board of Education, with the mayor, after these decisions have been made. And as is evident from this past discussion, us just driving in at the end and saying, well, let's add this or add that is unwieldy, especially if we don't know what to add or how much it costs or what the priorities are. As President Bishop just pointed out, I could put an amendment in there for like an extra $250,000, but what good is it going to be if it actually isn't part of the plan and if there was another way that it was already being paid for? So my question is does that chart that you have reflect any back and forth between whether the board was actually asked for extra money, like directly, or whether this was just proposed to the mayor? Or does it include, and also does it include instances where, for example, earlier it was said that the state of New Hampshire claimed that we were gonna get this much and then changed to get more? I am very foggy in terms of a couple of years ago, but I actually remember we went to bat at some point to try to get the state to reverse a particularly egregious, like, pass-down cost. And I believe that is why one of the numbers for the years was lower than what was actually proposed. So is that kept somewhere? Is this just the chart that is well, we started with this and we ended with that? Or is there somewhere where more complexity might be represented?
Dan Donovan, this chart is simply just, so it's the initial request put together by the superintendent and his or her team, and then the final step, which was the amount approved by the Board of Aldermen. There is another, I could add another column, what the mayor recommended. That would potentially be the same thing or slightly different. It depends on the board over time. Sometimes the board has reduced it slightly, sometimes they have added a little bit more. But I think one of the points you mentioned was, well, what's the sense of giving you money if you're not ready to put the plans in place? One of the things we've talked about is the ELL teachers. So we're adding 7, and then we hope to add maybe another 5 to 7 next year. You have to find them. And my point is, I don't want to put a budget together that suggests that we're going to be able to find 14 ELL teachers. We had 16 ELL teachers in Esser. We never got near that. So the whole idea of putting a number of people you hope to be able to find and then never being able to find them, taxpayers have to pay for things that never even existed. And then once it's with us, to be honest, we can spend it on whatever we want. So I'm trying to be responsible here to say, here are the things we think we can do. And if you're, the other thing about staffing, if you tell the superintendent we want to add 30 people, A, you got to find them, and then B, you got to train them, and you got to get the process going. He spoke to a lot of changes in the way we want to do things. We're trying to get some momentum. It takes a long time to move a ship this big. This isn't a, 100-person school district. This is thousands of people. So when you go to make a change, it takes time.
All set?
Just as a point of privilege, I didn't say that there was no point in giving more money. I think what was meant was if the aldermen tried to present, our ideas about what we could do, and the staff involved are literally saying, we don't need more, then we don't have anything to suggest. And that's what I was kind of pointing at, is that in the past, we've had chairs come up and tell us, like, well, if it was up to them, they'd give no money. And that's not a functional response for budgeting, at least at this level, where we have to know what we should add things to. I would point out, we could do contingency funds, where we say, okay, if you manage to hit the magic target and hire all of the ELLs that you budgeted for, we could program money in that says, all right, if you need more, then it's available. But there's also other mechanisms that our chair has pointed out in the past that maybe, and I think Alderman Kelly and I made a proposal in the past even to this effect, that we wanted to add paras because we knew that the DOJ was looking into how we were doing things and we might not be in compliance. And we didn't add it in the budget. We ended up doing it through unexpended revenues afterwards. So there's other ways that if the school district needs money or requests money, that the board will do what it needs to. And that's just something I want to make very clear, because I know there's the perception that aldermen say one thing in public and something else in private, but publicly, many of us have committed to funding the school district at the level that it needs and for the things that it needs. And so I just want to make sure that I'm on the record as saying that.
Okay, thank you. Did you have your hand up, Alderman?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask my question. It's sort of a follow-on to what Alderman Lopez was just talking about, but looking at the paraprofessionals, also talking about special education ELL, the questions that come to mind are paraprofessionals. I know we increased their pay to try to attract more. Have we been able to get up to full complement in our para category?
Dan Donovan, no. Um, Yeah, that's probably the positions we find to fill the full complement of paras is very difficult. So we haven't got there. Has it got a little better? Yes. Has it got all better? No.
Well said.
Follow-up? Yes. no
Follow up?
follow-up. So then my question, with paras, special ed, ELL, is it your conjecture that we are competitive price-wise, but we just have a dearth of people who want to do these jobs, or are we not competitive from a salary standpoint?
My personal opinion, the thing with some of the specialists, let's call them in the special education field, some of those people need to get sort of a much higher level. Let's be a psychologist. They can't just graduate with a 4-year degree and be a psychologist. They have to spend more money. Those staff are on the same grid as teachers. Okay, so when it comes, if money's the reason, I don't know if it is or not, but if money's the reason, some of these staff have to get more schooling, it costs them more money, they'd like to maybe start at a higher salary. Some school districts don't have them in the union, and they have more flexibility on what they can pay them. So would that make a difference? I don't know. That's a big discussion with the union that would have to take place. But
Thank you.
All set? Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a comment and a question, and I know Alderman Sullivan said he had a bunch of questions too. I'd like to hear his questions after, if possible, if he's ready to give them. So it sounds like we're going away from teachers, and we want more, I guess, mental health backgrounds in our schools. And I don't know if it's because, it sounds like they may not be unionized, and maybe that's the way around that. I don't know. Also, if we want 17 and we can only get 5, then put 9 in the budget. Like, don't put the whole amount, because you can use that money somewhere else. That's not being truthful to the budget. So I would try to be as accurate as you can. But my question is, Mr. Donovan had said that in the layoff section, he had placeholder dollars in there until they knew who the people were, and they now know who the people were. Is it possible to get real numbers for that, so we know exactly how much that dollar amount will be?
yes.
Thank you. That's it.
All set? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. My second questions are around surplus. And my numbers may be off. I went to the the month-end financials off of the city website. So a couple of the years aren't audited yet, which is kind of a larger question, but not for tonight. Fiscal year 21, you ran at a $4.3 million surplus. Fiscal year 22, $3.5 million. Fiscal year 23, last year was $5.5 million. What are you anticipating? We're through March right now, which leaves April, May, June, 3 months left in the fiscal year. What is your forecast at this point for surplus?
Dan Donovan, those numbers, Alderman Sullivan, include benefits. So the way I do my forecast is, as we discussed before, the Board of Education approves a budget without benefits, pension, and FICA. Those are added by the city. They have more information on what the costs of the various plans will be, et cetera. So when I do a forecast, if those benefit accounts run over, it's not my problem. The city's gonna have to cover that. Same way, on the other hand, if there's a lot of extra money in those accounts, I don't get to spend that. That goes back to the city. So those large numbers that you mentioned include benefits. I'd have to look at it without the benefits. But this year, same thing's happening. There's a significant, my forecast that I did at the last Finance and Ops meeting showed there's a significant excess in the surplus in the benefit accounts. But in all the other accounts, I'm looking at about, I think around $120,000 right now. That number will get tightened up more. And what's driving that this year is that 3.5 million that I talked about, where we're paying contracted service to provide these special ed costs, and it's very, very expensive. So that's eating up anything extra we have in most of our budget lines.
How far off was I fiscal year '23? I said 5.5. You had a surplus, but
No, we had a surplus. It was, I think it was around 1.5, 1.8 maybe.
would you mind following up on that?
No,
If
I
you
could, I can, so
just
I can go back like 3 or
21,
4 years.
22, 23?
Sure, I can
I'd
get that.
appreciate that.
Just to give Mr. Donovan some kudos, years ago, there was an issue with the school department overrunning their budget, which was a fiasco and a half, which we won't get into. But every year that Mr. Donovan's been in charge, they've had money left over. When you're managing a budget to his level, you can't budget it to the pennies. You gotta have some leeway in there, and he's managed it extremely well for all these years.
I had one
Follow
more
up?
question around headcount.
Okay.
My final subject. So I just looked at year over year. In the teacher line under FTE, we added 8 teachers. We added 4 paras. So our total teacher count and para count went up year over year. And then I saw the slide where we were cutting teachers in other schools. I'm assuming that that's the ELL situation. Is that correct?
Dan Donovan, yes, that's correct. We added some, we added the ELL, we added a couple other positions, and then we reduced the middle school and the elementary. So we kind of netted it off. You know, the whole idea that the population's different, the needs are different, we need different types of skills.
Follow up, please.
Follow up?
And overall, you added year over year about 20 people to the staff. Do you have a percentage breakdown? And this goes to the results question that Dr. Andre brought up in his slide about the state average in Nashua, or the city is below average when it comes to the school system. When you look at the mix overall, what is the percentage of frontline educator to administrator? Is it a 50-50 split, 80-20?
I don't know, but it's certainly not 50-50, not near there. Because you'd have to, I'm sort of thinking that through, you know, so a principal's an administrator, what's a nurse? That's frontline, so I guess if we went, I'd have to go through that calculation. We have
So maybe to put a finer point on it, speaking to Dr. Andre's point about the goal is to raise the performance of the school district. With 20 more heads, larger staff, how does that addition of staff contribute to that goal in the school district?
So, Dr. Andrade, so a lot of the staff that we're adding is to wraparound services and building capacity for some of the adults. So how do we help them focus on the results? So some new positions might be, you know, if it's an administrator, I would just pick on the director of digital learning. So we're investing a lot more in computers and new software. So how do we teach with that? So again, how do we provide, and that would result in students having more voice and choice to be able to demonstrate their proficiency and hopefully more independence. Or if it's around social emotional learning, that again, Maslow's, levels that the students are feeling safe at school, well-fed, and we're meeting the basic requirements. And that hopefully transfers over into the students actually, we're raising the student outcomes. But we can look at that breakdown. Again, I think that's where we're building the system. So what are the core teachers that we have? And with that slide, if it's 18.2 students in a classroom, but we're adding more ELL teachers, more special education teachers, more paras, that's not in that calculation of how many adults are actually servicing one child. So we'll be more than happy to break that down, but that's the intent on how are we building the students' skills to be independent on student achievement tests, so whether it's the SAS or some of our local assessments. So as far as administrators, I can just think of like just building principals, assistant principals, our directors. There's roughly about 80 administrators and close to 1,000 teachers. So about 10% or so of a ratio. And hopefully our administrators, our leadership are cultivating and fostering an environment where our educators can thrive and feel good. And hopefully that transfers into our students feeling better and providing those structures where, again, we are meeting the students' individual needs through differentiation or wraparound services where kids feel supported and they can push themselves to meet that proficiency level. So sometimes it's not a direct correlation of like, if we hire this person, we're gonna get that result, but how does it foster that community and culture?
Okay. I just have one more question,
Okay,
please.
follow up.
Yes. No, I don't promise. Alderman Tebow alluded to it, but I want to put some numbers to it. And as the Ward 9 alderman walking around, if someone asks me, hey, how come since 2018, the Nashua School District budget has increased 21.43% and student population has decreased 10.45%? This is 2018 to 2023. How do I answer that?
I can answer some of the questions.
You could start.
Thanks. Dr. Andrade, I think again, it's shifting needs. So I think if we could break down of how many special education teachers that we added, or the number of paras, so even though our population's decreasing, the amount of special education students in their services required is actually increasing. So I did it in a previous district, but again, you don't want to isolate what's the special education cost for students. That to me is discriminatory, of just saying our special education cost is going up by X, Y, and Z. Just look at special education transportation, the amount of services going there. So even though our student population is going down, the amount of services required for some of our students is actually more intense. So that it's requiring more para-educators, one-on-one, or more OT, PT services or other services coming in. So that's one area, and same thing with ELL population. Our ELL population is actually increasing a lot, requiring more ELL teachers. So that's two big numbers that are changing, and then obviously just the contracts going up, transportation, and some of those fixed costs.
Sure.
All set.
I swear I'm done.
Any other questions? Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of questions. Back to the, I'm hoping I'm saying it properly, IEPs. I know that we have to provide those for students that aren't physically in our schools, but maybe perhaps homeschooled or in another school and so on. Do we know what that cost is? It might be here and I just missed it, I apologize. And you did mention, just to kind of add to this, you did mention that we get the $80,000 for the state, I'm sorry, is it the $80,000 of state aid charter schools? Is that for the IEP, or is it the $50,000 from the Freedom account. That
Dan
covers the
Donovan, the
IEP.
Freedom account's just students that are going to a private school and the state helps pay for it. So they give us some money back.
Right.
Is that gonna last forever? Who knows? The 80,000 is specific to charter school students. Needs, the IEP, the special needs of those students. Most of our special needs students stay in district or they go to an out-of-district placement. The cost of the out-of-district placements for all the students where we don't have the resources internally to deal with them or whatever the final reasons are, that's about $6 million a year.
Okay.
It's probably gonna be about 6.4 million this year. Those costs have skyrocketed. We used to spend prior to COVID, about 5.5 million for about 95 kids. Now we spend an extra million for about 75 kids. So even though we've done a good job keeping some kids in district and actually bringing a few back, the costs of those services have really gone very high.
Thank you, I appreciate that. But to my question, do we know how many IEPs that we have to provide? And I say have to because I know it's not something we're volunteering, but these charter schools and so on, they don't have to provide it, but if it's a need, we have to provide it, just like we provide sports or whatever things they don't have. Do we have a cost to that beyond this revenue of whatever that we're getting from the?
Well, there's 2,000, there's 2,012 special ed students, so that means there's 2,012 students that the Nashua School District is responsible for that have an IEP. They could be in an out-of-district placement, they could be in our specific schools, they could be in a charter school, but most of them are out of district or in our schools.
Okay. I guess the point I was trying to get to was just so that the public understands that sometimes we bear the cost of these charter schools that are being touted and so on. That was the point that I was trying to get to.
Yes,
Dr.
Dr.
Andre, so just quick, simple math. So we have a minimum of 2 teachers who provide services to, 2 special education services who, teachers who provide services to students in charter schools. So if you just think of their salary, an average salary of, like, we'll just call it $70,000. If there's 2, you're already at $140,000, not including benefits. So that's not $80,000 that we're getting. So it's already an expense. I think that's what you're trying to ask.
Exactly.
We're spending more than we're receiving.
Exactly. That was the point I was trying to make so that people don't say, oh yeah, you're providing the services, but you're getting paid for it. I just wanted to show that for the public. Thank you. May I?
Go ahead.
I just have a couple. I've been trying to be really good and not ask. So, in the past, and I believe that it was Alderman Lopez and Alderman Kelly that, I think it was for the paras, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the school district, not you, I don't believe you were at the time, Dr. Andre, but in the past, when the school district wanted positions, but you weren't sure whether or not they were going to be able to, or they weren't sure they were going to be able to, we put money into a contingency. We didn't put it into your budget, because one of the things that we all know is that we only give you your bottom line, we don't tell you how to spend it. So to kind of keep things on an even keel. You mentioned something about that you're asking for 7 more, but you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to fill them. And I'm not saying that this is going to be the case, but if someone were to suggest that we fund it, but through a contingency and not put it into your budget, do you think that that would be this way? And I think it alludes to the points that we talk about, head counts and so on, and that's going to be my kind of follow-up question. It says here that you have FTE of 1,771.75 FTE, but how many of those are actually filled? How many of those do you think you really won't be able to fill? Because we know, like, even with the police department, they're always X number of officers shy. When they get up to par, a group of them retire. So just trying to trying to think of funding and so on.
Yeah, so our two biggest areas of need is our paraeducators and our special education teachers. This year, through the great work of our ELL leadership, Mr. Chopra and Ms. Booten, they've done a nice job of creating pathways to recruit more ELL teachers. So I think we're going to fill all 14 positions, ELL positions that are newly in the budget. Most of those positions are actually coming from internally. It's teachers actually moving from a grade 2 teacher or grade 6 teacher into an ELL position, which typically doesn't happen, but this is the first time in a long time that we see this trend happening. And then I think it'll be easier to backfill a grade 3 teacher. We typically find more regular education teachers than ELL teachers. So I'm confident that we're going to actually fill all 14 ELL positions. I'm not as confident that we'll fill all the paraeducators. I think currently, at our last HR meeting, we were still down close to 40 paraeducators this current year. So I'm not, and again, that's where the contracted services come in providing other resources. So those are in the budget, and Mr. Donovan can talk about, like, even though they're not filled, the expense is still there through a contract service. And with that final number is, so if I had to give what I would need for next year, like in ELL would be three coaches, 3 ELL coaches, like right off the bat. And then the other, as far as special education, Mr. Donovan's correct. If we can fill all the positions in the budget that we're currently looking at, we'll be in really good shape. So I don't know, I would be asking for more special educators. Again, our leadership and our from our special education department and working with our special education teachers, really have a good number on how many teachers that we need. Just in general, our special education caseloads for, I don't want to call it regular special education. High of a number, so we wouldn't be looking for more regular education teachers. Our intensive needs classrooms, that's the one that's more concerning, and it's harder to find intensive need teachers, paraeducators, or RBT, registered behavior therapists. And those are sometimes where those students end up out of district, which is a larger expense, but how do we retain or keep those students in district? The intensive needs is difficult because you need really talented, high-skilled people to do that, and it also impacts what's the culture of the school. For example, if we opened up 2 new intensive needs classroom in space that's available, we'll call it Broad Street. The overall population of Broad Street for special education students would be close to 30 or 40%. And that's not a typical placement. So we wouldn't put more special education students in that school because you're starting, and it would be similar to New Searles. So even trying to open up more intensive needs classrooms actually changes the culture and some of the stresses on the building, just because the intensity of some of those students and the supports needed and overall, population of the students. It's not a regular ed setting. If you start integrating more students that have intensive needs into a grade 3 classroom, you might end up with 30 or 40% of the students being special education and some with intensive needs. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a hard answer to answer, just saying these are your needs, and especially around special education where every student's different, obviously with the IEP, and their services could be something we can handle in-house as opposed, or it could be one student moving in that might cost the district $300,000.
Actually, I do have a quick follow-up on that, and then I have two very quick questions, if I may. Thank you. I appreciate that, no, and that does answer a lot of it. I guess I'm just kind of trying to fall back with, if we can't fill positions, why are we budgeting them? And I do understand that you said that we contract some of those, but we still have all these positions on the book, and I think Alderman Sullivan was kind of alluding to that fact we have these staff and we're not doing it. But then at the same time, I heard that you laid off a number of teachers. So my question to that is, were that empty positions or actual physical people that you've laid off?
Those were, so, I just want to be clear, and I don't want to call it, unfilled positions of more, when we report out, might be crossing guards, para-educators, food service, people in the kitchen. So and if we're short any teachers, like physical teachers, it might be at the high school where we couldn't find a math teacher, where Mr. Donovan said teachers would kind of pick up another class, so we made sure that we were still providing the services. So we weren't short like regular education teachers. So every, elementary school had enough teachers. Again, if you looked at the class sizes, we didn't have any unfilled regular education teachers. It was more special educators, paras, and food service, crossing guards, and ELL. But I think, again, this year, that's what we think, the ELL, that's what we need. And then in special education, that's what the IEPs are calling for. So I wouldn't say they're in the budget and they're unfilled, like, so just cut those positions. Like, if we fill them, it actually benefits our students. So, hopefully we're doing a good job and people want to come and work for us.
Just one more quick question. Again, following up to Alderman Sullivan's comments about the contracts and Mr. Donovan's comment about they were basically on the contract to where we were prior to COVID. And I'm not a big fan of contracting out any service that I think that we could work a little harder to try to get. So would we consider, maybe not, we can't do it this year, but would you consider trying to wean ourselves off a contract and try doing it as we had in the past?
Yeah, so
now that COVID is past us and we're moving forward, I do not like contracts for that particular reason. We're kind of being handcuffed to their whims and not ours.
Yeah, so this is Dr. Andre, and the contract I think you're referring to is our substitute
Right.
service.
Mhm.
I think it would be great. The one thing I would caution ourselves is the one nice thing about the contract is that this agency is out there doing all the recruiting and screening of all the substitute teachers, which alleviates the burden from our HR department. So if that went back in-house, we would have to look at, does our HR department need more resources in order to do all the recruiting for the substitute teachers? We process over 300 substitute teachers per year. So that's, again, that's a big number, and that's just a lot of processing on the HR department that this company is currently doing. That would fall back on our department, and would we need additional staff to do that? What's the cost ratio?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Said you only had one.
I know, but like Alderman Sullivan, they say something and it kind of comes up, and I see he raising his hand, so he's gonna have more too. But, so, I guess then my question is, have you done a cost analysis? Did you lose, when you went to this contract, did you give up any HR staff or something to that nature? And if not, I would assume that your staff could possibly, potentially hold this.
Dan Donovan, it was sort of a two-part process back, let's say, 10 years ago. The way the subs worked was we had, who we called her the pajama lady, okay? I never saw the woman until she came in and retired. But She would work from her home, she'd get up at 4 in the morning, whatever, people would contact her, she would call up and bring in subs. So we had her and her benefits, whatever, that was the cost. But then the other piece of it, then they'd have to come into HR and go through the fingerprinting, et cetera, and HR would have to do what they do for every other employee. So we added a online system called Frontline that called the people. So when we did that, she retired, was getting ready to retire anyway, so we went with the new electronic system. That works okay. The problem is people can shut off their calls. There's no real relationship. It's a computer or a program talking to people. And then COVID hit. So we never truly, was it going to work? I don't know. COVID decimated it. And now we're just trying to climb back out.
Okay.
So it's hard to really do much of a analysis.
All right. I was gonna take my turn in the bucket unless you got a specific question.
Yeah, it is specific.
Go ahead.
Just to that point, I think the specific line item was 950,000, if I remember. Is
Yes.
that, when that contracted services finds the person, do they pay them?
Yes,
Okay, so that number includes what they get paid.
correct.
Got it. That's it.
Hey, fortunately, your presentation answered most of my questions, but I got a few little things. The first is that the presentation, I want to make sure Donna gets a copy so it becomes part of the minutes.
She has it here. Yeah, she has it here.
Okay. The other thing is, just a couple, and not in any order. I noticed the electricity count went up, and I would hope that we are taking significant increases or decreases in electricity usage because of all the solar panels we put up. I know that we're savings at fairgrounds, I know we're saving at Pennachuck. I know it's also hard to get an exact number on that because you have to have historical data. And we're gonna be loading the top of the McCarthy School with solar, and sooner rather than later. So that will start taking effect in FY '25. So I did, and we also just did these energy improvement contracts to both high schools. So how is that factoring into your estimates for electricity?
Dan Donovan, the estimate for electricity came from our plant operations director, but actually the electricity didn't go up too much. The heating gas went up to
That's a
200,000.
different animal.
Yeah, the electricity, as you mentioned, the solar panels are great, but a lot of the energy is produced when there's nobody in the building. So I think Mr. Smith, the last number he shared with me was about 45% of what we're producing, we're using ourselves. The rest we're sending off to the grid.
Right.
So we're not saving the number that maybe some people would be able to save in their home or something because they live there every day. The energy savings, we're hoping to get, we have saved money at the high schools, and now we're going to change the number of times we put the fans on and the HVAC, and we're gonna be doing, because we increased all those. We increased the filters, made them thicker. Therefore, it takes more energy to run the fans, to run through the filters, and we're recycling the air more frequently. We're going to be reducing that as we go into next year. So if all those things happen and the solar gets better, then hopefully we'll have a reduction in that.
I know, because I've worked with Mrs. Smith on those bills, and trying to get a handle on exactly what the savings is kind of tough. There is some pretty good savings, though. And you're right, the solar panels generate a lot more electricity than we use in the school. It powers the whole school all day long. If we had batteries, which is another whole story we won't get into right now, that you could store some of the electricity. But the idea that the electricity goes back into the grid is why we get the solar panels for nothing. There's no cost to install them, there's no cost to maintain them, we just enjoy the use of the electricity. Okay, another thing, again, no particular order. You noticed, I noticed in your presentation, you said you had the union costs through FY '24. How many unions have contracts coming due in FY '25? And have you put money in contingency to cover potential cost increases? And I know we can't say how much, so don't say how much.
The only contract that is is due this school year is the NASIS, which is the supervisors, directors and supervisors. We have a tentative agreement with food service, though that's a special revenue fund, not a, but, so that will be coming forward to you in the next couple of months. It's the following year where teachers and paras. So their contract for teachers and paras runs through the 24-25 school year.
Okay, the other thing I forgot to mention is when we're closing Elm Street, I can tell you that the electricity usage, because of all we've done in energy savings in McCarthy, is gonna be a lot less. But of course, we don't have a number on it yet.
Coal budget will be down.
The other thing is, to keep the public informed, we kept talking about IEPs. I'm sure that a lot of people are saying, what the hell's an IEP? It's an individual education plan, but if you could, Dr. Andrew, if you could briefly, just tell us what an IEP is and who mandates it.
So an IEP is part of federal regulations, and it's to address students with a disability, an identified disability, and a team of teachers, administrators, working with the parents would develop an IEP to provide those services, and those services might be as simple as speech and language, or there might be a reading goal, a math goal, or they could be as an IEP as intense as requiring out-of-district placement. So it's really a special education program required by federal law to meet the needs of the students who qualify. We probably can have like a 16-part series on all the federal requirements part of that, but really it's a federal document that is created by IEP team to meet the needs of the students. Again, where it could be as simple as a math goal or a ELA goal that they see a special education teacher once a week or twice a week, to something as intense as a student requiring out-of-district placement in a residential school, transportation, and a whole host of other services that might be, $300,000 to $400,000. So it varies, but it is a team decision on meeting those goals.
I was gonna say, who writes IEPs?
Yeah, it's a team. As a superintendent, I cannot change an IEP. I don't have that authority. It truly rests as a team. There's a local education authority or someone who chairs that, who's the chairperson. It's typically a building principal, the director of special education, or an assistant director of special education, someone who's familiar with the special education laws to guide the team through the process. The team will look at education testing, whether it's the Woodcock-Johnson, they might look at psychological evaluations, WISC testing, local student achievement data, whether it's the New Hampshire SAS testing or other reading tests, DIBELS, and they'll look at all the student achievement data. They'll look at some normative data to see where the gaps are and make a plan from there. But it is truly a team decision where there's school experts around the table working with a parent to make a plan collaboratively. And once that plan is signed, it's now becomes a legal document that we have to fulfill.
That you have to follow.
Yep.
Okay, now, my last question, and it's just, having been in traffic out of both high schools, leaving the high schools, why is the monies coming in for permit to park at the high schools going down, since I don't see any reduction in cars? Also amazes me that all the cars in the parking lot that students are using are pretty new cars, which,
No judgment.
you know, yeah, but why are we give a reduction in the amount that we're taking in?
Dan Donovan, that's based on what we've collected the last couple of years. Maybe it's gonna start going up based on what you're saying, but that budget was, that estimate was put together based on the last couple of years. You know, if, the reality is, the authority on who gives out the passes, and that's at the high school level. You know, I've yet to go over there and start giving out tickets to people without parking passes, probably wouldn't do that. So I don't know if they've been a little more lax, maybe they have, maybe I don't know.
So I can say, Dr. Andrade, both high schools just recently put out a notification. I think Ms. Bishop probably got one. It was a mass communication on, they were ticketing. They were working with the city officials. We don't have the ticketing authority, so they were working with the NPD on ticketing cars without permits. So they've been looking, they gave students multiple warnings, and they finally started issuing tickets.
I could be wrong, but I think we've just seen increase request in the budget to increase the number of people that give tickets, so.
You're welcome.
All right, any other final questions from the committee first? That limited.
What about the riffraff?
Did you have a last question?
I do, just real quick, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of going back to the chairman's question about the electricity, when I look at the document that we have as far as the budget, it says that as of the end of March, we had about 1.3 million out of the 2.1 million that was requested. That leaves about 825,000. That was as of March 31st. And I look at that as there's only 3 more months left in the budget. I mean, here we are in May, so we're only looking at like 1 month. But I guess my question is, if that 3 months we would have had $825,000 left, why do you still need a $2.1 million based on? No, I don't mean that, but the heat, air conditioning, I know there's all kinds of things like that. But I guess my question is, with all the excess of the solar panels and everything that we're putting up there, I guess I don't understand why you still need a $2.1 million budget.
Dan Donovan, well, specific to the first part of your question, you gotta remember that with any bill, you're a month behind. So you say there's 3 months left, there's really at least 4 months left. My forecast for electricity will be, there'll probably be a little bit of money left this year in that, though it looks like the heating gas is gonna run over. So when I look at forecasts and budgeting, I look at all the utilities together. So in total, there might be a little bit extra, but not too much. And as I said, the way when we budget it, work with Mr. Smith, we have a historical spreadsheet, and we take a look at where it's been historically. We see whatever the rate is we have per therm or per kilowatt hour, or the case may be, and then we sort of budget it out. Those are large dollar amounts, so we don't want to be too aggressive in budgeting them. There might be a little bit left, but I think if you've looked at those accounts over the last few years, it's been within 100,000 or so.
Alderman Sullivan?
No.
Oh, I thought you had another question. Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, I neglected to ask about school safety, and I actually had constituents who specifically asked. Apparently, there's various social media pages dedicated to fights going on at the school.
That's not a budget question.
It is a budget question, because one of the areas that he said he's short of is Paris. So that was gonna be my question, is that area, the ability to keep an eye on hallways and all that kind of stuff, is that one of those areas? You mentioned crossing guards and that type of thing?
So, I think when we hear of the fights, a lot of the fights, I hate to say it this way, but most of them are coordinated.
Okay,
You
that's not
know,
good.
I mean, so whether there's both high schools have security in the building, we have cameras, we have access, and we can't have personnel in the bathroom preventing it. So a lot of it is just, unfortunately, the students are one step ahead in some of these instances. But both high schools are vigilant on making sure there's people in the hallway, whether it's administrators or their security staff. But safety is paramount. And unfortunately, I think there's, some of these things that are happening online are kids saying, meet me at this place at this time. And some cases, those reports get reported to the administrators and we could be proactive, and sometimes it's being reactive. I think it was through ESSER that we added more security guards, and some of them are now in the operating budget at the high schools. So, just speaking about the JSSBC, we are looking at more security vestibules in all schools. I really have to commend the district and the city on the overall safety and security of all our schools, and the proactiveness of making sure that our students and our adults in the buildings are safe. But I'm not gonna, sugarcoat it. There are fights at both high schools that are more coordinated than happenstance.
If there's anything we can add or help with in the budget, then let us know.
Absolutely.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm going to make a motion to table R 24057
You have to do by roll call.
by a roll call. The clerk, please call the roll.
Sure. Alderman Senate?
Yes.
Alderman Thiebo?
Yes.
Alderman Sullivan?
Yes?
Alderwoman Kelly?
Yes.
Alderman Wilshire?
Yes.
And Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
You have 6 yeas.
Okay. R 24057 is tabled till the next meeting. Now open for public comment. Is there anyone that would like to speak in public comment?
Good evening, my name is Paula Johnson again, and I'm glad I brought up about the enrollment dropping, and 2 aldermen picked up on, and I thank them for it. I got an email that I had requested from the mayor and Mr. Cummings, and I guess what really bothers me, and I used to say when I was on the Board of Education about deferred maintenance, how much deferred maintenance there is. And the fact of the matter is that you go and you ask for the money from the Capital Improvement Committee, and they just don't get it. You don't get the money. And then you get schools like Mount Pleasant Elementary School that is in need of over $25 million to keep it up and running, which I don't think we should do at this point in time, because I think once you start really getting into the renovations, it's going to be a scary thing over there. And what the estimate might be right now, before you actually get into it, and once you get into those walls and you have to start upgrading everything, I think you're going to probably looking at more than 25 million, probably closer to 30 million. And where the mayor said for the next 5 years, we can only spend $30 million a year. $30 million, and Mr. Cummings, when I went to the Ward 9 meeting, thought it was kind of cute, smirky, when I asked how much is the taxes gonna go up, and he said about 3 to 4% a year. Well, you know what, senior citizens, disabled people, and veterans, we don't all qualify for that elderly tax exempt. The numbers are all wrong, and I'm still doing my research. I've had a couple of family problems again. But the mere fact that our taxes are gonna go up that high again, people can't afford it. And so, as I sat here listening to this, I started making my little list, because I sent it over to Mr. Cummings asking questions here. I mean, we're talking about doing renovations in the City Hall, administrative services, City Hall renovations. Didn't we do that during COVID? We renovated this City Hall. You want $2 million. I think $2 million can go for deferred maintenance in the school district. Don't you think so? But we're going to put it into City Hall here. I can't understand. Administrative services. And then we're talking about mobile device management for $100,000. What the hell is that? Then you're talking about police new facility, $3.5 million, and a cell block for $2 million. But as you these numbers keep going up. I'm sure by the time we get to 1 year, there's $30 million that you've spent, just like that. And then we talk about, these were the mayor's priority. Oh, wait a second here. DPW garage. You remember Alderman Wiltshire when I was on the board with you, and we talked about it back then, and Stello Stadium, we'd give them another sheet of ice for $1 a year, like we did the last time. Is that in the best
30
interest
seconds.
for the taxpayers of this city? That's a $30 million bond. And so then we have the rail extension. You remember, we had the money back then for the rail, but we had to give it back to Charlie Bass. That's $1.5 million. I think this money is very well spent to do our deferred maintenance in the schools where our kids are. So although I don't like the budget, but they all know when I feel compelled about something, I'll fight for it.
Time.
But I'm sorry, this money needs to go to deferred maintenance. You all sat here and talked about the poor kids. Put the money where your mouth is now and do what's right and help these schools for deferred maintenance. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else for public comment? All right. Next item is,
No.
oh,
Yes.
go ahead.
Hi, I'm Regan Lamphere. I live at 237 Brook Villas Road, Apartment 4. I don't know if you have to say your address in the aldermanic meeting. But I'm on the school board. And I just wanted to say that seeing the history of the funds that have been approved for the Board of Education and the school district over the years, it's clear to see that education is very important for the people that run the city of Nashua. And I just wanted to thank you all for that, and I hope that you continue to fund the schools properly because, investing in the children of our city is investing in Nashua's future. So thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, general comments? Oh, remarks by Alderman. Alderman Kelly. By the way, you don't have to stay for this if you don't.
Well, I heard that this may be Mr. Donovan's last budget with us, so I wanted to say thank you.
Yes, July 16th, I am retiring.
Good for you.
You got our lives.
We'll miss you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll miss you, too.
No,
As he's
Perfectly
playing
what
golf,
I'm-
laying on the beach.
That's funny.
All right, do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. All, roll call.
Roll call.
Okay. Alderman Senate,
Yes.
Alderman Tebow,
Yes.
Alderman Sullivan.
No.
You're sitting too close to
I feel
him.
represented.
Alderwoman Kelly,
Yes.
Alderman Wilshire,
Yes.
Alderman Dowd.
Yes. We're
You have
adjourned.
5 yeas.
We're adjourned at 9:17 PM. Thank you.